The rain hammered against the reinforced glass of the detention center as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her tablet and prepared for what would be her most challenging interview yet. Through the thick security barrier, she could see her subject sitting motionless in the corner of the sterile white cell. The being appeared humanoid at first glance, but the subtle differences were unmistakable: skin that shimmered with an almost metallic quality, eyes that held depths no human gaze could match, and an aura of contained power that made even the hardened guards nervous. Zara 7, as she had been designated by the military, was the first of her kind to survive capture. The first to be taken alive after 3 years of brutal interstellar warfare that had claimed millions of human lives across 12 colony worlds. The hegemony forces, as humanity had dubbed them, had swept through space with technology that seemed almost magical in its advancement. Cities had been reduced to ash in minutes, entire fleets vaporized by weapons that bent space itself. And, now, one of them sat just meters away from Sarah, behind layers of energy barriers and armed guards. "Begin recording," Sarah spoke into her communicator. Interview Session 1 with Subject Zara 7. Date, March 15, 2387. She looked up at the being who had been silent for the past week since her capture. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm here to talk with you." The alien's head turned slowly, those impossible eyes focusing on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones, despite the translation software converting the words to perfect English. "They label me a monster," the alien girl whispered softly. "Is it really true?" Sarah felt her breath catch. In all her years as a xenopsychologist, she had never expected such a direct, vulnerable question from a being whose species had committed what could only be called genocide against human colonies. She studied the alien's face, searching for deception, but found only what appeared to be genuine confusion and pain. "Why do you ask that?" Sarah replied carefully, her training kicking in. "Never answer a question directly at first. Always probe for underlying motivations." Zara 7's expression shifted, and, for a moment, she looked impossibly young despite her otherworldly features. "Your people scream it when they see me. Monster. Killer. Demon. But I do not understand what these words mean in the way they use them. In my language, the closest translation would be broken harmony, but that does not carry the same weight of hatred." Sarah made notes on her tablet, her mind racing. The psychological profiles they had developed of hegemony forces suggested a hive mind mentality, beings incapable of individual thought or moral questioning. Yet here sat a creature who seemed not only capable of introspection but actively struggling with concepts of morality and identity. "Tell me about your people," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. "Help me understand." The alien's eyes seemed to grow distant, as if she were looking through dimensions Sarah couldn't perceive. "We are the Kethmori. For 10,000 of your years, we have served the great purpose. We shape worlds, guide evolution, ensure the proper flow of cosmic energy through living systems. What you call destruction, we call necessary pruning." "Pruning?" Sarah's voice carried a sharp edge despite her efforts to remain neutral. "You've killed billions of humans." "I have ended 17,432,611 individual consciousness threads," Zara 7 replied with mechanical precision. "Each death was catalogued, each life force returned to the cosmic flow according to the sacred equations. Until recently, I felt no conflict about this duty." The casual way she recited the death toll made Sarah's stomach churn, but she forced herself to continue. This was the first real intelligence they had gathered about their enemy's mindset. "What changed? Why do you feel conflict now?" Zara 7 was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the metal table before her. When she spoke again, her voice carried a tremor that the translation software rendered as barely audible whispers. "Earth colony designation Kepler 442b. I was assigned to cleanse the agricultural sectors. Standard procedure: identify the strongest biological specimens for preservation, eliminate the rest, prepare the world for proper seeding." She paused, her breathing becoming irregular. "There was a structure your people call a school. 47 young humans inside." Sarah felt her hands clench involuntarily. Kepler 442b had been one of the first colonies hit. The reports from the few survivors had been nightmarish, but hearing it from the perspective of the attacker was something else entirely. I entered the structure to catalog the specimens, Zara 7 continued. The young ones were afraid, naturally. Their fear scent was overwhelming. But, then. She looked directly at Sarah, her alien features contorting in what might have been anguish. One of them approached me. A female, perhaps 8 of your years. She offered me a drawing she had made. A drawing? Colored marks on processed plant matter. Your species' method of artistic expression. It depicted 2 figures under a yellow star. She said it was her and her mother, who had been killed in the initial strike. Zara 7's voice began to break. She said she drew it because she didn't want to be alone when she died. She asked if I would look at it so someone would remember her mother. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah found herself struggling to maintain her professional composure as she watched what could only be described as grief wash over the alien's features. I looked at the drawing, Zara 7 whispered. For the first time in my existence, I truly saw what these patterns meant. Not just biological pigments on cellulose, but an expression of love, of memory, of the desperate human need to make meaning from loss. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I killed her anyway. The equations demanded it. Sarah set down her tablet, her hands shaking slightly. But, you remember her. I remember them all now. Every face, every final word, every small act of defiance or acceptance. Before that moment, they were simply data points in the cosmic flow. Now. Zara 7 raised her hands and stared at them as if seeing them for the first time. Now I see the weight of what these hands have done. Your people call me monster, and perhaps they are correct. I have become something my own kind cannot recognize. What do you mean? The great purpose requires absolute dedication to the cosmic flow. Personal attachment to individual lives is considered a serious dysfunction among my people. When my handlers detected my condition, I was marked for correction. The warriors you have been fighting, they came not just to complete the cleansing of your worlds, but to capture or eliminate me as well. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this revelation. If what Zara 7 was saying was true, then she wasn't just a prisoner of war, she was a defector, or at least a malfunctioning soldier who had been abandoned by her own forces. You're telling me your own people turned against you because you developed empathy? Empathy. Zara 7 repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. Is that what this feeling is called? This ability to perceive the inner experience of others as if it were my own? Your language has a word for this? Humans consider empathy one of our greatest strengths, Sarah said carefully. It's what allows us to build communities, to sacrifice for others, to create art and literature and music that speaks to shared experiences. Then, perhaps, Zara 7 said, her voice growing stronger, I am becoming less of a monster and more of something else. But I do not know what that something is. My people have cast me out for developing human-like traits, yet humans see me only as their destroyer. I exist in a space between worlds, belonging to neither. The implications of what Sarah was hearing began to coalesce in her mind. If Zara 7 was telling the truth, if she had genuinely developed empathy and been rejected by her own species as a result, then she represented something unprecedented in the war effort. Not just intelligence about hegemony tactics and technology, but proof that their enemies could change, could potentially be reasoned with. Zara 7, Sarah said, using the designation the military had given her, what would you prefer to be called? If you're truly becoming something new, something between your people and mine, shouldn't you have a name that reflects that? The alien considered this for a long moment. Among my people, I was designated Kethmori 779 Harmony Seeker. But, you may call me Zara. It was a name spoken by one of the humans on Kepler 442b. A young male called for his sister Zara as he died. I found the sound pleasant. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This creature had taken the name of a victim, yet there seemed to be no malice in it, rather, it felt like an attempt to honor the dead, to carry their memory forward. The psychology at work here was unlike anything in her textbooks. "Zara," she said, testing the name, "if you could somehow make amends for what you've done, what would that look like to you?" Zara's expression became thoughtful, almost hopeful. "Your people speak of justice, of balance. In my culture, we have the concept of flow restoration. When cosmic harmony has been disrupted, it can be rebalanced through appropriate action. I have taken much life from your species. Logic suggests I should give life back in equal measure. How could you possibly give back 17 million lives? Not in the same form, perhaps, but..." Zara hesitated, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "There are things I know about my people's technology, their plans, their weaknesses. Information that could save millions more of your kind from sharing the fate of those I have killed. Would this not be a form of life-giving?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly what the military brass had been hoping for, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Zara's offer than simple intelligence sharing. The way she spoke about life and death, about cosmic balance and harmony, suggested a worldview that was simultaneously alien and strangely familiar. "There would be conditions," Sarah said carefully. "My government would want guarantees that you're not providing false information, that this isn't some elaborate deception." "I understand. Trust must be earned, especially from one who has broken it so thoroughly." Zara leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the fluorescent lighting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "But, Dr. Chen, I must ask you something in return." "What?" "If I help your people survive what is coming, if I use my knowledge to preserve human life, will that make me less of a monster? Can one who has caused so much death ever truly become a giver of life instead?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them fully understood. Sarah realized she was no longer just conducting an interview, she was witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a being caught between two species, two moral frameworks, two completely different ways of understanding existence itself. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and, somewhere in the depths of space, the war between humanity and the hegemony raged on. But, in this small, sterile room, something unprecedented was taking shape, the possibility of redemption, of transformation, of finding humanity in the most unlikely of places. Sarah looked into Zara's alien eyes and saw something that made her breath catch: hope. Desperate, fragile, barely formed hope that despite everything she had done, despite the blood on her hands and the hatred of an entire species, she might somehow become something more than the sum of her crimes. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "But I think we're about to find out." The recording continued, but Sarah had the distinct feeling that she was no longer just documenting a prisoner interview. She was witnessing the first chapter of something that would either save both their species or destroy them all. And, in the space between those possibilities, a monster was trying to learn how to become human. 3 weeks had passed since Zara first spoke to Dr. Chen, and the detention center had transformed into something resembling a research facility. Banks of computers hummed constantly as teams of analysts pored over the intelligence Zara had provided. Star charts revealing hegemony supply routes, technical specifications for their adaptive shielding systems, and, most crucially, the location of their primary staging ground for the next wave of attacks. Admiral Marcus Webb stood before a holographic display showing the Centauri system, his weathered face grim as he processed the latest intelligence briefing. The information Zara had provided had already saved 3 colonies from surprise attacks, but it had also revealed the true scope of what humanity faced. The hegemony wasn't just conquering territory, they were reshaping entire star systems according to some incomprehensible cosmic design. General Hayes wants the alien transferred to the military research facility on Europa, Colonel Rivera informed the admiral, her voice carrying the strain of weeks without proper sleep. He believes we've extracted all the useful intelligence from the current arrangement. Webb turned from the display, his expression thoughtful. What does Dr. Chen think about that? She's resistant to the idea. Claims the subject has developed what she calls psychological dependency on their current interaction structure. Moving her could disrupt the intelligence flow. The admiral had read Chen's reports with growing fascination and unease. The xenopsychologist painted a picture of a being in the throes of what could only be called an identity crisis, struggling to reconcile her programmed purpose with newly developed emotional responses. It was unprecedented in their understanding of hegemony psychology, but it was also potentially the key to ending the war. Meanwhile, several levels below, Zara sat in what had once been an interrogation room but now resembled a strange hybrid of laboratory and living space. Books lined makeshift shelves, human literature that Dr. Chen had provided to help Zara understand human emotional concepts. Art supplies covered one table, where Zara practiced the drawing technique she had learned from studying the child's artwork on Kepler 442b. Her latest creation lay before her, a detailed rendering of the school where her transformation had begun. Every detail was perfect, from the scattered toys in the playground to the expressions of fear and hope on the children's faces. But, this time, she had changed the ending. In her drawing, the children were alive, playing under a sun that bore two shadows, one human, one distinctly alien. "You've improved significantly," Dr. Chen observed as she entered the room for their daily session. She had taken to arriving earlier each day, drawn by her own growing fascination with Zara's psychological development. "I practiced the memory exercises you taught me," Zara replied without looking up from her work. "When I can reconstruct their faces accurately, I feel less disconnected from what occurred." "Is this what humans call closure?" Sarah studied the drawing, noting the subtle changes Zara had made. "It's one form of it. But closure usually involves acceptance of what actually happened, not changing it in retrospect. I understand the distinction intellectually, but my emotional processing seems to require this alternative construction." Is this self-deception a common human trait? It was questions like these that kept Sarah awake at night. Zara wasn't just learning human emotional responses, she was developing uniquely hybrid coping mechanisms that drew from both her alien psychology and her growing understanding of human nature. The result was something that fit neither species' behavioral models. Hope, Sarah said carefully, is often about imagining better possibilities. What you're doing isn't exactly self-deception, it's more like emotional repair work. Zara set down her drawing implement and turned to face Sarah fully. Over the weeks, her alien features had become more expressive, developing subtle muscle control that allowed for nuanced facial communication. It was as if proximity to humans was teaching her body new ways to convey meaning. "Dr. Chen, I need to share something with you, but I fear the knowledge will cause you distress." Sarah felt a familiar chill. These conversations often revealed information that fundamentally challenged human assumptions about the war. "What is it?" "The hegemony's ultimate purpose for your species. The reason why they have not simply annihilated all human life rather than engaging in selective cleansing." Zara stood and moved to the star charts that covered one wall of the room. "Your people assume we seek your territory, your resources, your strategic positions. This is incorrect. Then, what do you want?" Zara's finger traced patterns between star systems, connecting human colonies in a design that seemed almost ritualistic. "Humans possess something my people call chaos harmony, the ability to create complex order from apparent randomness. Your art, your music, your unpredictable emotional responses to crisis, these generate what we call resonance patterns in the cosmic flow." Sarah frowned, struggling to follow the concept. "You're saying you're harvesting us for our creativity?" "Not harvesting. Cultivating. The hegemony has discovered that human consciousness, when properly constrained and directed, can solve computational problems that our most advanced systems cannot. Your capacity for intuitive leaps, for finding connections where none should logically exist, this makes you valuable beyond any physical resource." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're turning us into living computers. The survivors of your colonies are not killed, Dr. Chen. They are incorporated into vast consciousness networks, their creative potential harnessed to serve the great purpose. From their perspective, they experience pleasant illusions while their minds work to solve cosmic equations they cannot consciously comprehend." Sarah sank into her chair, her hands shaking. "How many?" "Approximately 47 million human consciousness threads are currently active within hegemony networks. They believe themselves to be living normal lives on worlds that were never attacked. They age, form relationships, create art, raise children, all within carefully constructed mental environments while their unconscious processing power serves our calculations. That's worse than death." I thought you would perceive it as such, which is why I hesitated to share this information. But, you must understand the scope of what approaches. The next phase of the hegemony operation will integrate Earth itself into the network. 8 billion human minds, connected and directed towards solving the greatest computational challenge in galactic history. Sarah struggled to process this revelation. Everything they had assumed about hegemony motivations had been wrong. This wasn't conquest, it was slavery on an unimaginable scale, disguised as mercy. What challenge, she managed to ask. What computation is worth enslaving entire species? Zara moved to another chart, this one showing not star systems but what appeared to be mathematical formulas rendered in three-dimensional space. The universe is dying, Dr. Chen. Not in the way your scientists predict, through heat death over trillions of years, but rapidly, systematically. The fundamental forces that hold reality together are becoming unstable. The hegemony has calculated that without intervention, all matter will collapse into quantum foam within the next 1,000 years. And, you think human minds can solve this? Human consciousness has already begun generating solutions. The 47 million minds in the network have identified 17 potential approaches to stabilizing universal constants. But, the calculations required to implement any of these solutions exceed even our collective processing power. We need more minds, more of your particular form of chaos harmony. Sarah felt the weight of what Zara was telling her. Humanity wasn't just facing conquest, they were facing a choice between slavery and universal annihilation. Why are you telling me this? Your people cast you out for developing empathy. Sharing this information isn't just betrayal, it's potentially condemning your entire species. Zara was quiet for a long moment, her inhuman eyes reflecting depths that Sarah was only beginning to understand. When she spoke, her voice carried a resonance that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical form. Because I have discovered something my people did not calculate for. Something that may be more important than the great purpose itself. What? Free will. Conscious choice. The very chaos harmony that makes human minds so valuable also makes forced cooperation fundamentally flawed. The solutions your enslaved people are generating, they are incomplete. Brilliant, but missing crucial elements that only emerge when consciousness chooses to engage rather than being compelled. Zara moved to her drawing table and picked up the sketch of the impossible school scene. This image contains patterns that no hegemony mathematical system could generate. It represents simultaneous acceptance of loss and hope for redemption, a logical contradiction that somehow produces emotional truth. Your people's greatest innovations come not from computational power, but from willing collaboration, from choosing to trust each other despite risk. Sarah began to see where this was leading. You think the universe can only be saved through voluntary cooperation between species. I believe that forcing 8 billion human minds into network slavery will produce calculations of unprecedented scope, but they will fail at the crucial moment because they lack the willing creativity that makes your species unique. The universe will be saved or lost based on whether conscious beings choose to work together rather than being compelled to serve. And, you're willing to risk your people's survival on that belief? Zara set down the drawing and looked directly at Sarah. My people have already condemned themselves by choosing compulsion over cooperation. They have the power to save the universe but lack the wisdom to do it correctly. Humanity has the wisdom but lacks the power. Perhaps together. Together we could find a third option. Yes. But, it would require trust between species that have been at war. It would require my people to abandon the great purpose and humans to work with those who have enslaved millions of their kind. It would require everyone to choose cooperation in the face of cosmic annihilation. Sarah felt the magnitude of what Zara was proposing. Not just ending the war, but fundamentally transforming it into something unprecedented, genuine alliance between species in the face of universal collapse. There's something else, Zara continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. I have been in contact with others like me. Others? The process that changed me, the development of empathy through exposure to human consciousness, it is happening to more hegemony operatives. Not many, but enough to create what your people might call a resistance movement within our ranks.
We call ourselves the Broken Harmony. How many? Currently, 43 confirmed members across 17 operational theaters.
We maintain covert communication networks and have begun sabotaging hegemony operations when possible without exposing ourselves. But we are too few to affect the war's outcome through force alone.
Sarah's mind raced with possibilities.
A resistance movement within hegemony ranks, combined with human military forces and the intelligence Zara had provided, it might be enough to disrupt the next wave of attacks. But disruption wasn't victory, and victory against individual fleets wasn't a solution to universal collapse.
What would you need from humanity to make this work? This cooperation you're envisioning?
Permission to attempt something that has never been tried. A voluntary consciousness link between human and hegemony minds, designed not for slavery but for genuine collaboration. Your people would maintain their free will, their individual identity, but would temporarily share processing power with reformed hegemony operatives to tackle the universal stability problem together.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. There are no guarantees that such a link could be safely severed once established. No promises that human consciousness would emerge unchanged.
And no certainty that voluntary cooperation would succeed where forced integration has failed. Zara paused, her expression becoming almost pleading. But it represents hope for both our species to survive and grow rather than face extinction or eternal slavery.
Sarah realized she was no longer just conducting interviews or even intelligence gathering.
She was participating in the design of humanity's future, working with a being who had been designed as their destroyer but chosen to become something else entirely.
I'll need to discuss this with Admiral Webb and the other military leaders. I understand. But, Dr. Chen, time is running short. The hegemony fleet designated for Earth's integration is already en route.
They will arrive in approximately 6 of your months. If we are to attempt this alternative approach, we must begin preparation immediately. As Sarah prepared to leave for what would be the most important briefing of the war, Zara called out to her.
Dr. Chen? You never answered my original question. Which question? Am I truly a monster? Or is it possible for one who has caused so much death to become something that preserves life instead?
Sarah looked back at the being who had killed millions but was now offering to risk everything to save both their species. I think, she said carefully, you're becoming something entirely new. Whether that's monstrous or miraculous, we're about to find out together. As she left the room, Sarah carried with her not just intelligence that could change the war, but the weight of a choice that would define the future of consciousness itself. Behind her, Zara returned to her drawings, sketching not scenes of destruction but visions of two species working side by side among the stars, their different forms of intelligence combining to solve problems neither could face alone. The universe hung in the balance, and its fate would be decided not by weapons or conquest, but by the willingness of former enemies to trust each other with their very thoughts. The emergency session of the United Earth Council took place in a fortified bunker beneath Geneva, where representatives from every surviving human colony gathered via quantum-encrypted hologram. Admiral Webb stood before them, his usual composed demeanor cracked by the magnitude of what he was about to propose. Beside him, Dr. Chen's presentation materials seemed inadequate to convey the cosmic scope of their situation. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb began, his voice carrying across light years to reach desperate colonial governors and military commanders. We are not here to discuss tactical adjustments or resource allocation. We are here to decide whether humanity will exist as a free species or at all.
The next hour transformed humanity's understanding of their place in the universe.
As Dr. Chen presented Zara's revelations about universal collapse and the true nature of hegemony operations, the council chamber fell into a silence that seemed to stretch across space itself. The mathematics were undeniable, reality was unraveling at a quantum level, and only the combined processing power of multiple sentient species could hope to find a solution.
Governor Martinez of the Proxima colonies was the first to break the silence.
You're asking us to trust our minds to the same beings who enslaved 47 million of our people.
To voluntarily undergo a process that could destroy human consciousness as we know it.
The alternative, Dr. Chen replied carefully, is the forced integration of Earth's population into hegemony networks within 6 months, followed by the collapse of physical reality within a millennium. Director Yabuki from the Kepler research stations leaned forward in her hologram.
What guarantees do we have that this, voluntary cooperation, won't simply be a more palatable form of the same enslavement? Before Admiral Webb could respond, the chamber's main display activated.
Zara appeared on screen, her alien features now familiar to the few who had seen Dr. Chen's reports, but shocking to most of the council members. Several representatives reached for weapons before remembering they were viewing a transmission from a heavily secured facility. Honored members of humanity, Zara spoke, her translated voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone present.
I am the one your people call Zara 7.
I am the killer of 17 million of your kind, and I am the architect of the proposal before you. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Zara continued speaking, her presence somehow commanding attention despite the fury directed at her. You ask for guarantees of your safety, but I cannot provide them. What I can provide is proof of what voluntary cooperation might achieve, and demonstration of the risks we all face if we fail to attempt it.
The display shifted to show complex mathematical models, the same universal collapse equations that had driven hegemony policy for millennia.
But overlaid on them were new patterns, solutions that seemed to pulse with organic life despite their mathematical nature. These calculations were generated through the collaborative efforts of myself and Dr. Chen over the past week. Her human intuition combined with my quantum processing capabilities has produced approaches to universal stabilization that neither our species achieved alone. The mathematics work, but only when consciousness chooses to participate rather than being compelled.
Governor Torres from the Titan installation studied the display with growing amazement.
As a former physicist, she could appreciate the elegant complexity of what she was seeing. These solutions, they're using creative leaps that pure logic couldn't achieve.
But the processing power required to implement them would require the willing cooperation of approximately 2 billion conscious minds working in harmony, Zara completed. Not enslaved, not coerced, but choosing to share their unique cognitive gifts toward a common purpose. The implications were staggering.
Not just human minds, but the reformed hegemony operatives Zara had mentioned, and potentially other species they hadn't yet encountered. A vast network of consciousness working together not because they were forced to, but because they chose to preserve existence itself. There's something else, Dr. Chen added, activating another display.
The broken harmony resistance movement within hegemony ranks has grown. They now number over 300, including several high-ranking operatives with access to critical systems. They're prepared to disable the fleet approaching Earth and provide the technical infrastructure needed for voluntary consciousness linking. Admiral Webb stepped forward.
But they need a signal from us. Proof that humanity is willing to attempt this cooperation. The window for action closes in 72 hours. The debate that followed stretched through the night. Representatives argued ethics, practical concerns, and the fundamental question of whether trust was possible between species that had been at war for 3 years. Some insisted that humanity should fight to the end rather than risk their consciousness on an unprecedented experiment. Others pointed out that fighting had achieved nothing but the loss of 17 colonies and the enslavement of millions. It was Captain Sarah Okafor from the Mars Defense Grid who finally shifted the discussion. I lost my entire family in the Kepler attacks. My children, my husband, my parents all dead or worse than dead, trapped in those consciousness networks. I have every reason to hate what sits in that detention cell. She paused, her image flickering slightly as quantum interference affected the transmission. But hatred won't bring them back. And it won't save the billions of people still free. If there's a chance, even a small chance, that cooperation could free the enslaved minds and save reality itself, don't we have to try? The vote was closer than anyone expected. Of the 43 surviving colony representatives, 22 voted to authorize the cooperation protocol. 20 voted against. 1 abstained, unable to choose between certain death and uncertain transformation. The narrow margin meant that Admiral Webb had authorization to proceed, but not the unified support that such an unprecedented venture really required. As the council session ended and representatives returned to their distant worlds, the weight of the decision settled over everyone involved.
3 days later, the first voluntary consciousness link was established in a laboratory deep beneath the detention center. Dr. Chen lay on one side of a medical bay filled with equipment that merged human neuroscience with hegemony quantum manipulation technology. On the other side, Zara rested within a crystalline matrix that interfaced directly with her alien neural systems. Remember, Dr. Chen said as the technicians made final preparations, "We're not trying to solve universal collapse in one session. We're just proving that voluntary cooperation is possible."
"I remember," Zara replied, her voice carrying new undertones of uncertainty.
Dr. Chen.
"Sarah, if something goes wrong, if I lose control and begin to compel rather than collaborate,
I'll sever the connection manually," Admiral Webb assured her from the observation deck.
His finger hovered over an emergency switch that would physically destroy the linking apparatus if necessary. As the connection established, both women felt something unprecedented, not the forced merger of minds that hegemony technology typically created, but a voluntary sharing of consciousness that preserved individual identity while allowing access to each other's cognitive capabilities. Sarah found herself thinking in mathematical dimensions her human brain couldn't normally process, while Zara experienced emotional resonances that gave new meaning to abstract concepts. Together, they focused on a small piece of the universal collapse problem, the instability in quantum constants that affected gravitational fields around binary star systems.
Sarah's intuitive understanding of pattern recognition combined with Zara's computational precision to generate solutions that neither could have conceived alone.
The breakthrough came suddenly. Where previous approaches had tried to stabilize universal constants through brute force calculation, their collaboration revealed that consciousness itself was a stabilizing factor.
Aware observation at the quantum level didn't just measure reality, it helped maintain it.
The universe wasn't just a physical system but a conscious one, requiring the active participation of sentient minds to remain coherent.
"It's not enough to solve the equations," Sarah whispered as understanding flooded through the link. "Consciousness has to choose to maintain reality.
That's why forced integration fails. Enslaved minds can calculate solutions, but they can't make the conscious choice to implement them." "The universe is collaborative by nature," Zara added, her mental voice filled with wonder. "The hegemony has been trying to save existence through control, but existence itself requires freedom to persist." As they severed the connection after 6 hours of unprecedented collaboration, both women felt the loss of expanded consciousness like a physical ache. But they also carried with them proof that the experiment could work and a deeper understanding of what success would require. The data from their session reached Admiral Webb within hours, and he transmitted it immediately to the broken harmony resistance within hegemony space. The response came faster than expected, carried by quantum communications that should have been impossible to trace. Kethmori 917 Lightbearer, the hegemony operative leading the resistance, had risked everything to make contact. The message was brief but carried implications that changed everything. Voluntary cooperation protocol successful.
Universal constants show measurable stabilization in test regions.
Fleet approaching Earth has been convinced to delay integration timeline. Prepare for broader cooperation network.
Time grows short, but hope grows strong.
Over the following months, something unprecedented took shape across multiple star systems.
Humans who volunteered for consciousness sharing worked with reformed hegemony operatives to tackle pieces of the universal stability problem.
Other species, contacted by broken harmony agents, began contributing their unique cognitive gifts to the growing network. The Veltar added temporal perception that allowed work across multiple time streams simultaneously. The crystal and Nexari contributed perfect mathematical precision. The energy-based coal offered insights into the relationship between consciousness and physical law.
Not everyone participated.
Large portions of humanity remained suspicious of any cooperation with former enemies. Significant factions within the hegemony continued to pursue forced integration, leading to what historians would later call the consciousness wars, conflicts between those who sought to preserve individual will and those who demanded absolute unity of purpose. But the voluntary network grew, and with it came solutions to problems that had seemed impossible. Quantum stabilization protocols that required conscious choice to maintain.
Gravitational harmonics that could only be sustained through willing cooperation between multiple forms of sentience.
Reality maintenance equations that transformed universal collapse from an inevitable end into a manageable challenge requiring ongoing collaborative effort. Dr. Sarah Chen, now bearing the title of Consciousness Coordinator for the Terran Union, stood in the observation deck of the Joint Research Station orbiting Alpha Centauri. Through the reinforced viewing ports, she could see both human and hegemony vessels working together to construct reality maintenance arrays, vast structures that required constant conscious monitoring to keep universal constants stable. Beside her, Zara had undergone changes that made her appearance even more unique, still recognizably Kethmori, but with modifications that reflected her hybrid nature. Her skin now showed patterns that shifted between metallic silver and warm human-like tones, and her eyes held depths that seemed to contain the wisdom of both species. "You asked me once whether you were truly a monster," Sarah said, watching their joint crews work together among the stars. "What do you think now?" Zara considered the question while observing a mixed team of humans and reformed hegemony operatives calibrating quantum sensors. "I think," she said slowly, "that monster and hero may be human concepts that don't apply to what I've become. I am something new, someone who chose transformation over stagnation, cooperation over control, hope over despair." "And the 17 million? I carry their memory every day. Not as guilt that paralyzes, but as responsibility that motivates. Each life the network saves, each solution we discover together, each moment of voluntary cooperation between former enemies, it doesn't erase what I did, but it honors what they might have accomplished had they lived." A communication alert chimed, bringing news from deep space. The fourth voluntary cooperation experiment had succeeded in permanently stabilizing quantum fluctuations around the Vega system. Another small piece of reality secured through conscious choice rather than forced compliance. "The universe is safe?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer was more complex. "The universe is being saved, one conscious choice at a time. The mathematics show we need approximately 3 more centuries of continuous cooperation to achieve full stability. Not 3 centuries of war or conquest or forced unity, but 3 centuries of beings from different worlds choosing to work together despite their differences." Sarah smiled, watching their combined fleets move in perfect coordination through space that no longer threatened to collapse into quantum foam. "Humanity, fuck yeah," she said softly. "I do not understand that phrase," Zara replied with what might have been amusement. "It's something humans say when we accomplish something impossible through stubborn determination and cooperation. Usually against overwhelming odds." Zara considered this, her transformed features shifting into an expression that combined alien geometry with human warmth. "Then, perhaps it should be consciousness, fuck yeah. Because what we've accomplished here isn't just human, it's the result of every species that chose hope over fear, cooperation over control, voluntary unity over forced compliance." As they watched the stars shine steadily in space that would continue to exist because conscious minds had chosen to preserve it, both women understood that the question of monsters and heroes had become irrelevant. What mattered was not what someone had been, but what they chose to become and the willingness to keep choosing, day after day, to build something better than what came before. The universe was vast and fragile and filled with beings capable of both creation and destruction. But it was also filled with consciousness that could choose to work together, and in that choice lay the difference between extinction and eternity. In the end, the alien girl had found her answer. She was neither monster nor hero, but something far more important, a conscious being who had learned to choose hope, and to help others make the same choice. And, in a universe that required constant conscious effort to maintain its existence, that might be the most heroic thing of all.